Ladies, gentlemen, and Harajam of all ages, Druid is such a wonderful class, isn't it? Diablo 4 is full of stuff to do, tons of monsters to kill, and lots of different ways to do it, and different activities to undertake to murder them all. But what matters to us all is how we feel while we are doing it, right? And nothing is more important to the feel of the game than the build that you're using. And today I'm here to show you all one of my favorite Druid builds, one that I think is undoubtedly the king of speed clearing content currently. The vast majority of the footage that you will see today is me doing tier 41 nightmare dungeons, meaning that they have level 95 enemies inside of them, and I am level 81. So that is a 14 level discrepancy in the scaling. That said, just watch it. If I didn't tell you that there was that level gap, would you even have noticed it? This thing eats through monsters like absolutely nothing, and it does it while not only being a werewolf, but unlike the other strong werewolf druid build, it does it using an actual werewolf skill, with shred being your main damage source within this build. Rather than just flinging out tornadoes from a distance, this thing puts you right up in the action, hacking, slashing, jumping back and forth, dashing enemy to enemy, and just popping them like a pile of pimples on the acne-ridden face of a dungeon. I call this build Bounce Bolt, for reasons that are probably pretty obvious from watching it do its thing. Essentially, once everything is running properly, you just hold down the shred button and watch it go from enemy to enemy one at a time, popping down lightning bolts to clear out massive groups in a single swipe. Again, even with enemies 14 levels above me. That said, let's talk about the main reasons why this works and why it's so effective, and the big one is a specific unique item that I was interested in from the first time I saw it, called the Waxing Gibbous. This one-handed axe makes it so when you kill an enemy with shred, you gain stealth and guaranteed critical hits for 1 to 2.5 seconds, depending on the roll. Combine this with the Storm Claws aspect, which makes critical hits with shred drop AoE lightning bolts for a good portion of the damage dealt, and what you get is a speed clearing menace. Everything else is built around this simple synergy, and it looks oh so pretty in practice too. Essentially, you just need to find one weak enemy, assassinate them to activate the buff from Waxing Gibbous, and then from that point you just hold down shred to kill things quickly enough to keep the buff active until you stop fighting. To put it in perspective, I cleared one of those tier 41 nightmare dungeons in literally 3.5 minutes. Enemies 14 levels above me, and only 3.5 minutes to clear the whole place. So this thing is strong, incredibly strong. I would say it is definitely a little bit less tanky than Pulverized Druid or Tornado Druid, which means that it may struggle to push all the way to the end tier of Nightmare Dungeons, but if you want a pure offensive menace, something that can speed clear content easier and faster than any other build that I've seen for Druid, this is absolutely the one. And again, I'm doing that on stuff that is 14 levels above me. I cannot emphasize that enough. With that then, let's break down the Bounce Bolt Lightning Shred build. We'll go over all of the skill points and where to put them. This one doesn't really work properly until you have that unique axe, so just so you know, I would not call it a leveling build, but you can definitely make shred as a concept work while leveling even without it. Just letting you know that this specific incredible build only works once you have that unique. We will go over the spirit boons for it as well, the legendaries and uniques that make up the version of the build that you're seeing me use to just rip through things, my general gearing advice for the build, the Paragon Board setup that I've got going, and then just a quick overview of how to play the build optimally and any tips that I've got for you as well. Without further ado then, let's dive on into the skills themselves. First things first, you want Storm Strike as your basic skill. This is just an incredible basic, and it's hard not to use it in pretty much any druid build, partially because it gives you damage reduction for a few seconds after hitting it, but even more so once you go for the Fierce Storm Strike enhancement to give it a whopping 50% to apply vulnerable, on an attack that hits multiple enemies at a time too. That's just incredible. Then when we move on to the core skills node cluster, you obviously want to put 5 points into shred. This is our main damage source, so any bonus skill points to this skill that you can get from armor make it even better too, which is why I have 9 ranks. Then you want to grab Primal Shred all the way down here. Shred is a 3-hit combo that only costs spirit the first time you press the button in a sequence. By default, the first hit dashes to your target, and the follow-up hits just deal a bunch of damage. Primal Shred, however, makes every hit perform the dash, and that is what makes this as bouncy as it is, as bouncy as you're seeing. Essentially working like a conduit shrine, but not only permanently, but also dealing dealing a lot more damage too. As well, the forced enhancement here makes Shred gain 30% attack speed and also heal you for 1% of your maximum health every time it hits an enemy, which applies to all 3 hits of the attack. Past this, you want 1 rank of the Heart of the Wilds passive to raise your maximum spirit by 3, but as usual, this is actually just a gateway to get all 3 ranks of Wild Impulses, which makes your core skills cost 9% more spirit, but deal 15% more damage, which is almost always a worthwhile trade-off. And after that, you want to grab 1 rank of Predatory Instinct down here, which gives you 2% bonus crit chance against close enemies, but again, this is just a gateway passive because we get guaranteed crits from Waxing Gibbous anyways, so you want to use this to get all 3 ranks of Digitigrade Gate for 9% increased movement speed in werewolf form. After that, we move on to the defensive skill node, and here we take Cyclone Armor. This gives you 10% non-physical damage reduction just passively, which is quite lovely, but you can also activate it to create a knockback effect if you are in danger and also deal a bit of damage. The forced enhancement makes it make enemies that are knocked back by it also get slowed by 70% for 2 seconds afterwards, and then we are taking Preserving Cyclone Armor, which gives you 30% damage reduction for 2 seconds when you're hit by an enemy on a 10-second internal cooldown. This essentially just makes you tanky on occasion, basically. After that, we take Blood Howl down here, which is a big meaty heal that gains extra effects with our enhancements. By default, this skill has a 15-second cooldown, but the forced enhancement gives this cooldown a reduction by 1 second every time you kill an enemy. So if you are actively killing enemies, this cooldown is way lower than 15 seconds. Preserving Blood Howl makes this effect give you 20% attack speed for 4 seconds every time you cast it. This build kills more than fast enough to essentially keep full active time on the attack speed buff in a dense enough dungeon. After that, we grab a couple of passives here, 3 ranks of Ancestral Fortitude for 15% non-physical damage reduction, and then also Vigilance we want 3 ranks in as well to give you 15% damage reduction in general for 6 seconds after casting an offensive skill. And once again, with how often that we reset Blood Howl, this will be active far more often than it isn't.
Work fast, but work safe.
Then we completely skip out on the Companion Node cluster and move on to the Wrath cluster to take Hurricane. We are using the Tempest Roar unique helmet in this build so that our Storm skills also count as werewolf skills. It also makes our Storm skills have a chance to give us a bunch of spirit back when they hit enemies, so that's actually really good for fueling the build, and so the Storm skill inclusions do not hinder us at all. Hurricane is just a big area of damage around you for 8 seconds by default, and we take the regular enhancement for a 25% slow to enemies hit by Hurricane for 2 seconds, and Savage Hurricane, which lowers the damage that enemies deal in Hurricane's range by 20%. This is really important for tankiness. It's good in group content too, because lowering enemy damage actually stacks differently than increasing your own damage resistance. It's sort of like damage buckets, but for defense instead of offense. Past that, we also take a bunch of passives in this cluster. First, Elemental Exposure. This gives your Storm skills in Hurricane, Cyclone Armor, and also Storm Strike have a 10% lucky hit chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds when they deal damage. Then you also take 2 ranks of Endless Tempest for a 10% bonus to your Hurricane's duration. These are the least important 2 skill points right here in the entire build. Feel free to move these around if you want to, wherever you think they might be better, but once everything else was spent, I just felt this was the most relevant place to put them, especially as I just wanted to increase the damage rather than the tankiness. After that, you want 1 rank of Neurotoxin over here, which applies a slow to all poisoned enemies. This is a gateway through to Toxic Claws, which makes critical strikes with werewolf skills, which is all of our damage skills thanks to Tempest Roar, apply 23% of their base damage as poison over 4 seconds. Most importantly, this also enables Envenom, which increases your crit damage against poisoned targets by 30%. Count in the fact that we are doing guaranteed crits about 99% of the time, and suddenly these 2 passives are a ton of value put together. After that, we move to the Ultimate Node cluster, where we take Grizzly Rage. Yes, this is a wolf build, and this is a bear skill, but we use the aspect of the Direwolf legendary to transform Grizzly Rage into a werewolf skill and change its effect a bit. Of course, we also take the enhancements, and the total effects of the transformed Direwolf Grizzly Rage are a 20% damage increase that grows every second that you remain in Direwolf form, 15 to 25% movement speed increase, and this build can reach movement speed cap as well, which is awesome to experience on a druid where travel speed is normally a weak spot of the class. Then also a 30 to 50% spirit cost reduction instead of the damage reduction that the skill would normally give you. It also makes you unstoppable for the entire duration thanks to an enhancement, which is fantastic. It gives you full immunity to crowd control effects, so you can just do as you please while this skill is active, and it also fortifies you for 8% of your maximum life per second while the skill is active, with a default length on the skill of 10 seconds, but our gear and spirit boons mock this up to a nice 16.5 seconds, and you also gain an extra second for every kill that you get while the ultimate is active, up to 5 additional seconds for 21.5 seconds max. The cooldown is about 45 seconds, but that includes the time that it is active, so this is active about 50% of the time. Past that, we also have some passive skills in this node cluster here. We take 3 ranks of defensive posture to raise our fortified generation by 15% from all sources, 3 ranks of nature's resolve for a 15% chance to fortify for 4% of your maximum health anytime that you are hit by an attack, and 3 ranks of unrestrained, which reduces the duration of crowd control effects against you by 9%, tripled to 27% when you have fortify for more than 50% of your health, which you most often will do with this build. This is important because the only real way that this build will die outside of super high tier nightmare dungeons is if you get crowd controlled long enough that you just cannot move out of dangerous things on the floor, as otherwise this build is stupidly mobile and has incredible regeneration ability, so reducing the ability for crowd control to screw us over when outside of Grizzly Rage is quite important. Then finally we have our key passive, which in this build is going to be Lupine Ferocity, which gives every 6th hit with a werewolf skill a guaranteed crit, and also makes it do 60% more damage. Essentially, this is just good for the damage part, as the build is obviously based around guaranteed crits, but it is still more good than any other key passive does for this build. And that's it for our skill points then, so let's have a look at our spirit boons instead. In the Deer Path, you want the Wariness boon for 10% reduced damage from elites. This is pretty much just always good. Then we do a Spirit Bond with the Eagle itself, and take both swooping attacks for 10% increased attack speed, and also Avian Wrath for 30% increased critical strike damage. In the Wolf Path, we take Calamity for a 25% increase to the duration of ultimates, including Grizzly Rage, and then in the Snake Path, we take Masochistic, which heals us for 3% of our maximum health every time a shapeshifting skill crits, which is where a lot of our regen actually comes from, as the whole build is based around guaranteed crits, and it also is all doing damage with shapeshifting skills. You could definitely make an argument that you could instead bond with the Snake instead of the Eagle, and then instead of the 10% attack speed increase, you could take something like Overload, which would give the lightning procs from shred crits, have a lucky hit chance to launch off a bonus AoE lightning strike, or Calm Before the Storm, which would give our Hurricane tick specifically a 10% lucky hit chance to reduce the cooldown of our ultimate. But honestly, with the fact that this is only procced by Hurricane, really, it's not as worth it as it is in a proper Storm build. I messed around with all 3 of these, and personally I found the attack speed to be most consistently useful. With that then, let's talk about everyone's favorites, Uniques and Legendaries.
Oranges.
Of course we should start off here with Waxing Gibbous. This unique fuels the entire build, and it doesn't really work without it. Guaranteed crits for a short duration after killing an enemy with Shred, it doesn't get better than that for what we're doing here. If you have multiple of these and are choosing which one is better, which one you should use, I'd say you want a minimum of 1.5 seconds on the guaranteed crit duration if you can, and aside from that, just whichever one has the higher damage number, as it is a weapon after all, and so having the higher damage matters quite a bit. The second most important aspect is what we have on our amulet for a 50% increase in power, the Stormclaw's aspect. This makes critical hits with Shred call down a lightning bolt which hits the area around the target for 30 to 45% of the initial damaged crit from Shred. Shred can also hit multiple targets at a time, so on properly grouped up enemies this gets really nasty really fast. We also have the Direwolf aspect over here. This is what transforms Grizzly Rage into a wolf skill instead of a bear skill, which makes it work with the build in general, which is extremely important because we also have the aspect of the Rampaging Werebeast. This increases the duration of Grizzly Rage by 1 to 5 seconds, but also makes any crits that you get during Grizzly Rage increase your crit damage by 10%. This stacks with itself repeatedly, ridiculously for the entire duration of Grizzly Rage, letting you hit some insane crit damage modifiers affecting every single hit, especially in a build like this designed to get nothing but crits ever. Then we also have the aspect of Retaliation, which increases your damage by 20 to 40% depending on how much of your health is fortified. We have tons of fortified generation in this build, and so this is most often fully activated. Then finally, for our offensive aspects, we have the Accelerating aspect, which makes critical strikes with core skills, meaning Shred, increase your attack speed by 15 to 25% for 5 seconds, and so this is essentially always active because of the way that we've built ourselves. We also use the Tempest Roar unique in our helm slot so that our storm skills count to shapeshifting skills, and it also makes our storm skills have a lucky hit chance to restore some spirit, which again is really good. It makes you avoid using your basic skill and lets you actually pretty much just hold down Shred. It gets pretty nasty, honestly. It also lets us use our Cyclone armor and Hurricane during Grizzly Rage, but it also makes the damage from those skills apply to things like Masochistic, which heals us up even more. It's very, very effective for this. It's not required to make the build in the first place if you're wanting to just try it out in the mid-level 50s or so and you only have the weapon, but it does make it feel properly complete, and it helps it gain quite a bit of spirit generation, and it makes it quite a bit tankier. Then we have the Ghostwalker aspect on our boots. This is honestly one of the best legendary aspects in the game for boots for classes with reliable reliable, unstoppable effects. It boosts your movement speed by 10 to 25% and also lets you walk through enemies while you have the unstoppable buff. Grizzly Rage makes you unstoppable for the entire duration, so this is active that whole time. Past that, we have our defensive aspects. You can shuffle these out for other defensives if you don't have these exact ones, or these exact rolls if you don't have good rolls, but these are the ones that I believe to be the best for this build if used properly. We have the vigorous aspect for a 10 to 15% damage reduction just permanently while in werewolf form, and this build, by the way, always in werewolf form. Then we have the aspect of disobedience as well. This gives you 0.25 to 0.5% increased armor for every 4 seconds, every time that any hit connects with an enemy, stacking up to a maximum of 25 to 50% increased armor in general. This build attacks loads, it attacks fast, it attacks in large groups, so you can keep this nearly fully stacked most of the time. A low roll on this legendary isn't really worth much, but a high roll is incredibly strong. That's it for legendaries then, so what about our stats in general? Essentially, willpower is basically your main priority, as it is a damage multiplier, which is great. You need ranks of shred on your gloves. Shred is our main damage source. It's more important on the gloves more than anything else, so you want it as strong as possible. Crit chance is essentially useless in this build to have on gear, as we have a source of guaranteed critical hits outside of exclusively single target scenarios, but you might want just a bit of crit chance just for those single target situations. Then you want to build your general stacking damage modifiers. Your crit damage is a really big one. On top of that, your vulnerable damage is incredibly good if you can get it, no matter what. It stacks pretty high, and it's hard to get increases to this in general, so the more of it that you can get generally is better. Almost always a priority. Attack speed is really good too, and then also any bonus ranks to other skills that we get are nice to have too. Outside of that, damage reduction. This build excels at killing, but it could be a bit better at surviving in particularly high tier nightmare dungeons, so if you want to run really high tier dungeons, you should focus more on survivability stats. For gems, you actually want emeralds in your weapon for extra crit damage against vulnerable targets, you want rubies in your armor for bonus maximum life, then you want skulls in your jewelry for bonus armor. And that's it for gear, so let's move on to the big bad scary Paragon Board. On the starting board, you want to head along the right side for the nice 20% increase to your damage, hard to ignore that one, then follow the quickest path to the glyph socket in the middle. If you don't have many Paragon points, you should actually put the exploit glyph in here. This is the earliest place where it can activate the secondary effect, and that effect is super important to have, but if you get to the third Paragon board in this build, you should instead put the spirit glyph in your starting board, as the exploit glyph is better utilized later on. The spirit glyph gives you increased critical damage with core skills based on the amount of dexterity purchased in the area, then also has a secondary effect of a stacking debuff that increases the damage that enemies take from you every time you get a crit against them. From there, grab into nearby rare nodes over here, and proceed up to get to the next board. The next board that I recommend here is Ancestral Guidance, and I think this is honestly really good for any druid build that spends spirit for damage, as the legendary node gives you a 30% damage buff for 5 seconds every time that you spend 75 spirit. So place it like this, take the rightward path over to get it, grabbing the rare node along the way, then head upwards towards the glyph socket once again, grabbing the nearby rare nodes all the way along the path. Rare nodes are great, you want to have them, and then once you reach the glyph socket, you want to put in the werewolf glyph. This gives you bonus damage in werewolf form, depending on how much willpower you have purchased in the radius. Then also plus 10% damage reduction while in werewolf form if you properly activate it, which you can do with the default range on the glyph. After that, go back around to the right to go to the board connecting gate on the right side and pick the Lust for Carnage board. What this does is give you 2 spirit every time you get a kill with a werewolf skill. This is part of what makes this build rarely ever actually need to use the basic skill outside of single target fights, so place the board like I have here, take the top path because the rare node up here is actually incredible, werewolf skill damage and critical strike damage. You probably want to grab the magic nodes around it, that's just a lot of really powerful nodes close together, and then wrap down to the legendary node. After that, you want to crawl over to the glyph socket. Inside of this glyph socket, you want to put in the exploit glyph. If it is leveled up to level 15, you want to prioritize getting this to level 15 because if you put it in this slot before then, you won't be able to activate the secondary effect. At level 15, the range increases and you can't activate it, and that secondary effect is super important. This glyph does give you bonus vulnerable damage depending on how much dexterity you purchase in the radius, but the bonus effect makes enemies get the vulnerable debuff when you attack them on a 20-second cooldown. Essentially, this is so the first time you hit an enemy, they become vulnerable. This build basically just uses that to one-shot out big groups of enemies with forced crits super quickly, jumping from one to the next, applying vulnerable, and then assassinating them en masse. After that, you want to fill out the area around here a bit, grab the rare nodes nearby, then head to the board attachment gate at the top. Here you want to go for the Heightened Malice board. None of the remaining boards offer us anything that works for all of our damage, but Heightened Malice makes this even sillier at clearing out groups of enemies super quickly, and that's what I think this build excels at, so we should really just sort of lean into that. This gives you a 45% damage increase when there are 3 or more nearby poisoned enemies. Remember that all of our shred hits are critical, and all of our werewolf skill crits apply poison. So essentially, if a group of enemies survives one shred hit, they will not survive the second because of this. So beeline right for the legendary node, and then when you get in here, then you'll want to take the left side path to get the rare node with bonus damage to poisoned enemies, and also bonus damage to elites. Bonus damage to elites is great, elites are scary, get rid of them as quickly as possible. After that, you want to of course wrap up and around to the glyph socket, fill in everything that you need around here, but in the actual glyph itself, we'll be sticking the territorial glyph, which gives you bonus damage to close enemies relative to nearby purchase dexterity, as well as 10% damage reduction from close enemies when activated. Purchase all the dexterity around here too, obviously, then get to the attachment gate on the left. In this last one, there's undoubtedly, just unfortunately, not many great boards left for us, but the best one remaining is Thunderstruck. More for the rare nodes that are on the build than anything else. Rotate it so the legendary node is in the top right, then head to the top right side rare node. This is the really good one for us. It gives us extra critical strike damage, it gives us extra vulnerable damage. All the magic nodes around it are more of those stats, so you want to grab them. After that, you want to go for the actual legendary node. Of course, it may not be perfect for us, but it does still help at least a little bit, and it's not bad to have, and this will leave you with just enough points to fill out the whole path to get to the glyph socket. The final glyph that you want in this socket is Undaunted. This increases the damage that you do to enemies while fortified relative to the intelligence purchased in the radius, with the bonus effect of giving you a bonus 10% damage reduction while you're fortified. That covers the entire Paragon board for this build then, so let's round it off by talking about how to play the build and any tips I have for you. As for the literal how, it's actually pretty simple. Cyclone armor is just if you are being absolutely swarmed by enemies and you're in danger of dying. Otherwise, you mostly just want to use it for the passive effect rather than the active, as grouped up enemies are good for you, so knocking them back doesn't really help. Blood Howl you want to use literally as often as you physically can hit the button, it's just great. Hurricane you want to use on cooldown as well, and Grizzly Rage mostly just use that on cooldown unless you know a boss is coming up, in which case you sort of want to save it for the boss, at least so it's active when the boss appears, even if you started a bit earlier. Storm Strike is only really there for either single target fights or situations where you run out of spirits, but that does not happen all that often. Other than that, Shred is your best friend. When you approach enemies, use your brain to work out which one of them likely has the least health, and just try to assassinate that one. Once you get the first kill, you have guaranteed crit, so use that to keep killing with Shred and reapply the buff to yourself and keep getting more and more critical hits. If you do it right, you can easily get halfway through a dungeon without dropping the ambush proc and not even pressing your basic skill even once. Essentially, the whole goal of this build is to move quickly, so don't stop to grab loot while doing the dungeon unless you absolutely need to. You can always run back to pick everything else up once the dungeon is done. Trust me, it's faster if you can chain from one group of enemies to the next one without losing your guaranteed crits. That's how I did a tier 41 nightmare dungeon in 3.5 minutes at level 81. Simple as that. The more grouped up things are, the better as well, but other than that, it's not at all hard to play this build. Just press and hold Shred and watch things melt. That's it for today then, everyone. Everything you need to know to both make and use the Bounce Bolt Lightning Shred build. One of my favorite experiences that I've had with Druid so far, simply using Shred with a specific unique and legendary aspect to essentially become a conduit shrine, except you're both faster and stronger than the conduit shrine effect, and it lasts permanently. It's just your build, which is just plain silly. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy using this build yourself if you try it out. I'm a big fan of it, and I think that you'd probably like it too. Let me know what type of Druid builds or synergies you want to see turned into a full-on build in the future. I think I've just about reached the end of the tippity top tier strongest builds that are in the game currently between this, Tornado Wolf, and Pulverized Druid, so unless we discover something new as far as crazy synergies go, most of the builds from here on out will be more the sillier, funky stuff that is really fun and still pretty strong, but just on a slightly lower tier than the top 3. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.